Welcome back to Living with Pilonidal Cyst Disease. If you're new here, my name is Ashley, and I started this podcast to share my personal experience living with pilonidal cyst disease. I want to say this right at the beginning. I am not a doctor or a medical professional, and everything I share on this podcast is based entirely on my own lived experience. If you're looking for medical advice, please speak with a healthcare professional. I originally started this podcast after seeing a Facebook post about pilonidal cyst disease because honestly, nobody talks about it. And once I shared my story, I had people reach out asking if I could turn this into a series so they could follow along, hear different perspectives, and feel less alone. I'm back to film episode 7. Episode 7 is all about what happens after surgery day. Once the adrenaline wears off, once you leave the hospital, and when the real healing actually begins, both physically and emotionally. So, the first few days after surgery were really interesting. Like I talked about in the last episode, my surgeon puts what he calls a 72-hour freezing into the incision area during surgery. The goal of that is to help give your body relief for those first few days because, according to him, when your brain knows your body is in pain, it actually slows down the healing process. So the idea is that if your body can rest and heal without pain signals firing constantly, it can heal faster in those first critical days. Now, for most people, it doesn't actually last the full 72 hours, and for me, that was definitely the case. Mine probably lasted about 36 hours. The day after surgery, we actually left Wisconsin. I was cleared to travel 24 hours after surgery, so my mom and I started driving home. We drove about halfway and stayed at a hotel for that night. It was that night at the hotel when I started to notice that the freezing was wearing off. I could start to feel the incision site a little more, and it definitely was starting to become more uncomfortable. And honestly, it's kind of hard to explain what that actually feels like. If you've ever had a procedure where your skin has been cut open and then stitched back together, it's that type of feeling. It's not necessarily sharp pain all the time, but it's definitely uncomfortable. Getting up, sitting down, moving around, everything just feels tight and tender. Your body knows something major happened there. It's not a comfortable feeling, but it also wasn't unbearable for me. Another big part of recovery was getting used to the drain. I had my drain for about 9 or 10 days, and the process with that was actually very structured. My surgeon gave me a chart to track everything. At the beginning, you empty and measure the drain bulb 3 times a day. So every morning, I would get up, empty the bulb, measure the drainage because the measurements are marked right on the bulb, record it on the chart, and then reset it. Then I would do the same thing in the afternoon and again right before bed. As the drainage number gets lower, you move down to twice a day, and then eventually once a day. And once it gets below a certain number, and I honestly can't remember exactly what that number was, then you are cleared to remove the drain completely. By day 3, I was home, and once I was home, I honestly didn't leave the house much while the drain was still in. I kind of just stayed at home, rested, recovered, and let my body do what it needed to do. The only people who really saw the drain were my immediate family, my grandparents, when they stopped by, and my boyfriend at the time. It took maybe a day to get used to the drain being there. At first, it's definitely weird because it's literally coming out of your body, but after a day or so, it just became part of the routine and it didn't really bother me as much. Sleeping was another adjustment. The first night after surgery, I slept on my back, but I'm naturally a side sleeper, so after that, I mostly slept on my side. It didn't bother me too much most of the time, but sometimes I would wake up and realize that I had been lying on the incision area for a long time, and it would definitely feel sore when I got up. Because at the end of the day, it's still an incision and it's still healing. So I kind of just adapted day by day and figured out what position made me feel the most comfortable. One thing that definitely changed for a while was how slowly I moved. After surgery, I moved like an absolute turtle, or so it felt. Walking was slower, getting up was slower, sitting down was slower. The friction of moving your legs can be uncomfortable because everything in that area is healing. So even simple things like walking across the room just took longer. But honestly, that didn't really bother me. I knew it was temporary and that my body just needed some time. Now let's talk a little bit more about living with the drain because mentally that was probably one of the weirdest parts. Like I mentioned, you're measuring it multiple times a day, tracking the output, and making sure everything is working properly. But the other thing is, it's visible. It's literally a tube coming out of your body and leading to this little bulb that collects the fluid. I always made sure I had sweatpants with pockets so I could tuck the bulb into my pocket and hide it as much as possible. I would tuck the actual tubing into my sweatpants too, leaving just enough slack so that it could drain properly, but not enough that it could get caught on something, because one of my biggest fears was accidentally pulling it out. I was constantly worried about that. What if I rolled over in my sleep and pulled too hard? What if it got caught on a doorknob? Or what if I snagged it on something and ripped it out? In reality, that never happened, but the anxiety around it was definitely there. And because of that, I actually refused to go out in public while I had the drain. I just stayed home until it was removed. It made me feel more comfortable and less stressed. One of the most emotional moments during recovery was the first time I saw my incision. I had looked at so many pictures online before surgery. Honestly, I probably looked at way too many. If you're someone who's preparing for this surgery, my advice would honestly be don't obsess over the pictures the way I did, because a lot of the images online show worst case scenarios or healing stages that look really intense. When I saw my incision for the first time, it definitely surprised me. At that point, it was still very fresh. It was red, swollen, and bruised. There were steri strips across it, tape, gauze. It was yellow in some areas from bruising. It looked like what it was, a major incision that was healing. And yes, my scar is not small. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It does change the shape of the top part of my butt, but it was still nowhere near as dramatic as some of the images I had seen online. Even so, the first time I saw it, I was definitely a little taken aback. I remember thinking things like, how high up does this go? Will people be able to see it if I wear a bathing suit? Is this going to affect intimacy? Is this just what my body looks like now? And that emotional moment of realizing this is permanent. This is what this part of my body looks like now took some time to process. It took time to learn to accept that my body had changed, even though the surgery was done to give me my life back. Recovery isn't just physical, it's emotional too. Your body looks different, it feels different, you're learning how to move again, how to trust that area again, and you're also living with this constant question in the back of your mind. Did it work? Because even though the surgery is done, you still have that small percentage of people where the disease can come back. So a lot of recovery, for me at least, was learning to sit with that uncertainty and just trust the healing process. And that's something we'll talk about even more in future episodes. But for now, this was the beginning of recovery. Slower days, careful movements, measuring drains, learning to accept a body that looked a little different than before, and slowly, day by day, starting to heal. Having to learn to accept that, like, okay, I'm not going back. This is what my body looks like now. This is what it's going to look like, and this is how I'm going to accept it and move forward with it. I think I actually have another episode where I talk a little bit more about that part of things. Physically, during the healing process, I was definitely bruised and swollen for a while. The area was yellow and purple for quite some time, which is pretty normal after surgery like this. The swelling did go down fairly quickly though. For reference, I had my surgery on November 30th, and the very first day I went back to the gym was January 1st. I remember that really clearly because I was counting down the days. I kept thinking, okay, once a full month passes, I'm finally allowed to go back. Now, when I say I go back to the gym, that doesn't mean you can go back to doing everything. At that point, you're still very limited in what you're allowed to do. But honestly, I think I spent like 2 hours at the gym that day because, for one, it was finally an outing, and two, it was finally something I was allowed to do again. So I was like, well, I'm just going to stay here for a while. Even at that point, my incision was still healing. Incisions like this don't heal overnight. My surgeon actually told me that for some people it can take 6 months to a year before that area truly feels normal again. By the time January 1st came around, I was feeling pretty good overall. If I accidentally bumped the area off something, it would still be uncomfortable, and I definitely had moments where it was still sore, but it wasn't anywhere near what it felt like at the beginning. It just wasn't fully healed yet. For me personally, I would say that around the 6-month mark was when things finally started to feel normal again. And that's also when I stopped thinking about it constantly. Before that, I was always aware of it. Sometimes I would accidentally bump the area on something and it would feel bruised again, which wasn't on purpose, obviously, but it would happen. It really did take a long time for my body to fully recover and for that area to start feeling normal again, even when it came to things like certain clothes being comfortable. The drain came out around day 9 or 10. I honestly can't remember exactly which day it was. When the drain came out, that spot also had to heal, and I do have a small scar where the drain was. It's not a huge scar or anything, but I can definitely see where it was. Then there's the mental side of recovery, which honestly might have been the hardest part. For the first year after surgery, I was constantly wondering, did this actually work? I was waiting for another cyst to come back. I remember one time, I think close to the 1 year mark, I felt the tiniest bit of pressure in that area and I immediately panicked and I went to my mom and I was like, I'm getting another cyst. It didn't work. You need to email my surgeon. My surgeon asked me to send pictures, and when he looked at them, he basically said, no, you're still healing. That area is probably just tender. There is no visible sign of a cyst. And there literally wasn't anything there. I had basically created this whole scenario in my head because I was so anxious about it coming back. I had this huge fear of being part of the 2% because that's roughly the percentage of people whose disease come back after the surgery. And in my head, I kept thinking, well, bad things keep happening to me, so I'm probably going to be that 2%. But I'm very happy to say that I'm not. 3.5 years later, I am part of that 98%. It took me a long time to trust my body again. Honestly, sometimes I still struggle with trusting that area of my body. For so long, I felt like my body had failed me because every time I thought things were getting better, another cyst would show up. So learning to trust that this was actually over took time. It took a long time to accept that yes, that part of my body had changed. Yes, it had been altered. And yes, I had surgery to remove something permanently. But that experience doesn't define who I am, and it doesn't control my life anymore. Learning to trust that took a really, really long time. Then there's the adjustment to a new normal. Having a scar, having a slightly different body shape, and having a different awareness of that area of your body. When I first saw the scar, I was really worried that people would be able to see it if I wore a bathing suit, but thankfully my scar doesn't come up high enough for that. When I'm wearing a bathing suit, shorts, or normal clothes, you can't see it at all. Nobody else can see it, I just know it's there. Because of that, sometimes I'm still a little self-conscious about that area. The shape is a little different than before, and it doesn't look like the average person's body. But I'm also incredibly grateful that the person I'm with now, who was my boyfriend at the time, has been with me through this entire process. He knew what my body looked like before surgery, during recovery, and after, so I've never had to explain to him or feel embarrassed about it, and that made a huge difference for me emotionally. Even now, 3.5 years later, that area is still a little sensitive. It's scar tissue, and when nerves are cut during surgery, they don't always reconnect the same way. So it's just sensitive in a different way. For example, there are certain exercises I simply can't do comfortably. You know those ab exercises where you sit in kind of a V shape on the floor, balancing on your tailbone with your legs up? Yeah, I can't do that. It puts way too much pressure on the scar area and it's really uncomfortable. So I just don't do it. And that's something you learn over time, what feels okay and what doesn't. Healing for me overall was actually pretty smooth, but it definitely took time. A lot more time than I expected. And now, honestly, I don't think about it every day. I don't think about my surgery every day. I don't think about my scar every day. I don't constantly think about what my life looked like back then. Am I still aware of that area of my body? Yes. Are there things I probably would have done before that I just don't do now? Yes. But it's not because I'm afraid of triggering another cyst. It's more just because I know what's uncomfortable for my body, so I avoid those things. It's not fear anymore, it's just understanding my body a little bit better. If I'm playing a contact sport or doing something more physical, I'm just mindful that that area is still sensitive. But honestly, that's really where I'm at in my everyday life now. I don't think about it every single day anymore. I don't react the same way that I used to. and I definitely don't baby that area the way I did during the early stages of recovery and even before surgery. So, yes, it changed things a little bit. It changed my body a little bit, and it changed parts of my life a little bit. But overall, it gave me my life back, and that's something I'm incredibly grateful for. One thing I really want people to understand, though, is that recovery isn't just physical. There's a huge emotional side to it, too, especially when you've had surgery that changes your body. And honestly, that applies to a lot of different situations. I don't think people always realize that just because a surgery is meant to help you or even fix a problem, that doesn't mean the adjustment afterward is easy. Yes, the surgery gave me my life back. Yes, it fixed something that had been controlling my life for years. But my body isn't exactly the same way as it was before, and that takes time to accept. For some people, altering their body is a choice, like a cosmetic procedure where someone decides they want something differently. But when a surgery is done for health reasons, it can feel very different emotionally. Yes, I chose to have surgery, but it wasn't really the same type of choice. It was something I needed to do to move forward with my life. And for some people, adjusting to those kinds of changes can be really difficult. Some people even go to counseling or therapy to work through the emotional side of having their body altered in that way. So I think it's really important to say that recovery from something like this isn't just about the physical healing. Yes, that's a huge part of it. But for me personally, there was also a lot of emotional healing that had to happen too. And honestly, sometimes I think that part of recovery took even longer than the physical healing. Because surgery might fix the problem, but learning to trust your body again, that takes time. In the next episode, we're going to talk about what life really looks like after recovery and how I learned to move forward after years of dealing with this. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next episode.